The inroads Islam has made into Christian lands bother an immense number of people. The inroads the Caliphate has made is perplexing. Even more perplexing is how the ones perplexed remain observers to their own subjugation. Why is the reaction against Islam so muted? There is nothing rational or sensible about the progress of Islam. In pitched battles they generally always lost out to the West. Muslims are inherently terrorists. They win by terrorizing the enemy, not by battlefield strategy. Their greatest victories on the field were achieved by Christian mercenaries, the Janissaries. The narrative, in the West, has always been that Islam is spread by the sword. History suggests it is a violent religion, but in some respects the violence of Islam hides a deeper and darker truth. But this is as much a condemnation of the Church as it is about Islam. Until we can uncover what so much effort has gone into concealing, we will not understand the dynamic that is playing out between these global adversaries. It will take some time to dig down deep enough to unearth the sobering truth about the spread of Islam and the capitulation of Christianity. Bear with us. As with anything dealing with fundamental truths, we need to begin with Eden. But perhaps it makes more sense to start before this. To understand the events of Eden, we need to understand the structure of reality. The conflict we see did not emerge out of nothing. It took the form of the container it is in, namely reality. Either God created reality or He did not. If God created reality, He created all of it, including logic. Reality is governed by logic, and logic determines the form reality takes. Logic in turn determines what makes sense to us and the limits of what we can do. Logic is analytical, deductive, and absolute. There is only one logical truth, and for reasons that have been gone into elsewhere, the truth is moral, not ethical. This means reality is built on a moral foundation, not an ethical one. This is important to know because our systems are all ethical in nature. But the world we are in does not see truth or reality in this way. The reality we are in is not logical or moral. Mankind has embraced a conception of reality that sees reality as physical. Physical things appear to have substance. But for this kind of reality to exist, it must contain in itself all that God purports to be. God is the creator according to God, but physical reality is self-generating according to this world. If there is no God, there is no Satan. There is no good or evil. However, there is a difference between God and Satan that cannot be so easily erased but has been hidden in plain sight. Those who worship Satan are ruled by the passions. People who oppose God are phenomenologists. Secular reality is tied to the experiences of the body. The law is created to administrate people as if they were physical objects. This is a necessary consequence of the phenomenological viewpoint. But there is a tension between the law and those who it attempts to regulate. The law is meant to liberate, to give freedom to a particular expression of life. But the law must restrict freedom. The Caliphate is one expression of the law, but it seems diametrically opposed to liberalism as well as the Church. Why is it embraced by so many? Why would liberals prefer the Caliphate, a culture totally at odds with their own peculiar ideas of freedom, over a Christian theocracy? Why do Christians, after allowing liberalism to make so many inroads into the Church, more likely to embrace the Caliphate than establish a theocracy? First, let us look at what we mean when we speak of a theocracy. A theocracy is a government under the rule of God. This is not, despite what many assume, the rule of people who say they serve God. The divine right of kings was conceived of as a kind of theocracy, as is the Catholic Church, and even Islam is considered a theocracy. However, in these pseudo-theocracies, the administrative head of state is always a man. In some respects, a meritocracy conveys the kind of reform needed, better than theocracy does. Theocracy has attained the connotations of a system with a religious leader who exercises dictatorial powers. The earth's theocracies are more about legitimizing dictatorship than in giving God his due. Churches are meritocracies in the sense they bind on earth based on the evidence given by the fruits that are created by works of faith. These fruits correspond to the church. As we help the faithful, we build the church. Building the church is a cultural and social activity, not a physical task. The church is a system and a methodology. But this is a problem, for a theocracy is alien and alienated from everything else that exists in the physical world. There are two grand systems or methods for humans to choose from. There are many ways of expressing the conventional path. The system we know of as physical reality forms institutions that are ethical, liberal, and law-based. The conventional path covers every system and institution humans use or have used, other than the church. People can easily move from one conventional lifestyle to another, without much discomfort. To even go from secularism to Islam is not the big step most think it is. Most nations quickly adapt to being taken over by Muslim clerics. Both classical liberalism and its secular governments in Islam create legal structures, governed by law and demanding certain rules and regulations be followed. How much different is it to not drive when drunk to not driving when one is a woman? They are just simple rules anyone can implement. That secularism and Islam are not compatible does not mean they are not built with the same materials. The difference is in the law that regulates them, but law changes over time even in the same nation. Is abortion being illegal under Islam different from abortion being illegal in the West, which it was for a time? But Christianity is a faith. For most people this is not a significant feature or impediment to their goals in life. However, most Christians are similar to the Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons. The Bible is adopted as window dressing, but the core of a Christian community is life that is grounded in ethical-based systems. Church is very much an incidental prop to a secular lifestyle for the majority of Christians. However, grafting Scripture onto a law-based social system causes harm to be done to the Bible. This is why the mainline churches consider the churches that do this cults. A cult changes the Bible in a substantial way. The Bible is made subject to conform to the cult's doctrines. A church accepts the Bible as inerrant, even though not all of its interpretations will be identical to the interpretations held correct by other churches. Mainline churches do not think the Bible is wrong. They accept as there is a disagreement the fault is human not divine. The only way for a church to justify its doctrines is by means of biblical exegesis, not by editorialization. But cults claim the Bible is wrong, inadequate, fallible, or out of date. Thus, they invariably create their own particular Bible. But this denial of the Bible and the reliance on law is nothing more than a cover to maintain the status quo. Technically, the reliance on law is the system of things the Bible refers to as Babylon. Babylon is a term used to express what humans have been under since their ejection from Eden. It was not fully formulated in Eden, but Eden witnessed the rise of the female principle and the doctrine of female empowerment. The female principle was expressed in the devil's doubt regarding the man's claim as to what God said. Woman became the judge of what truth was. Remember in Genesis 2, God spoke to Adam, not to Eve. The words of God were transmitted to the woman through Adam. Then in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve hear God in the garden, but it is to Adam whom God speaks, and it is Adam that recounts the events of the day. We need to understand that man did not know evil. The knowledge of good and evil is the mystical gnosis that permits man to challenge God. But man is under God and cannot challenge God, so it is through the woman that evil works. The ejection from Eden is man losing his connection with God and becoming a liberal feminist enslaved to the feminist principle of tolerance. But all of this centers on the woman's manipulation of men. Women trade sex for protection and property, and from this root we get liberalism. One cannot both want and give freedom. So, freedom must be regulated. It is from the desire to be free and avoid accountability that creates the need for law. Need it be said that if there is to be regulation, there needs to be a regulator. This is the state. Nothing we see came about by accident, and none of it was not predictable. But what we are doing here is figuring out why Christians would rather a caliphate than a church, in the form and style ordained by God. This comes down to why man prefers law to living in faith. First, let's summarize what we have said so far so we do not get lost in the details. In Eden, the feminist principle of tolerance was established. But tolerance leads to freedom and the need for regulation. The need for law is the source of our various governments, not the least of which is the Caliphate. These law-based systems are legalistic and ethical. Subjects of the law are made good by obedience to the law. Freedom and the law seem at cross purposes, but we have to understand freedom as being something more than the absence of order. Freedom is not chaos, though it verges on this, in the absence of law. What liberals seek from freedom is moral freedom or freedom from consequences. Liberals seek to avoid accountability. There is no freedom if one's actions are tied to the costs you create. The law allows people to get what they are entitled to without cost. The law gives people rights without necessarily imposing duty upon them. We are protected by the police whether we want to be or not, or will help pay the cost of policing or not. The key thing to remember is that regardless of the ways the conflicts in this world are portrayed, the key difference is our financial state. A person or group is ethical or moral, which means they are liquid or insolvent. Moral persons pay their costs out of income. Ethical persons create laws and regulations, but this is a cover for the creation of debt and liabilities. This may seem a strange way of dividing the world, but we will not fix our problems until we understand the root cause. This actually explains why Christians prefer the Caliphate to the Church. That being said, to incur a liability, a claim must be made against something we could not purchase with cash. This is not just a cash flow issue, it is a moral issue. Did the owner even sell what you purport to own? Did the person who you purchased the asset from have legal title? There are no moral absolutes without a clear, absolute, and unburdened title. Do not think we are making a mountain out of a molehill here. If you think this, you have no idea of how mankind got into this mess. You surely have no path out of it. Do we realize how dependent our reason is on the Bible being true? If there is no good and evil, meaning a clear and distinct line of demarcation between right and wrong, rationality is not possible. The Bible is true, or rationality is beyond us. Ethical beings are not rational creatures, they are legalists. There has to be a right answer and a moral one, if we are to be rational persons. But we cannot just legislate the right answer, in the way legalists do with the ethical systems they create. One cannot regulate good into existence. The law cannot define what is good nor legislate out of existence what is bad. We are all aware that every law will have exceptions that render the law unjust. It is illegal to go over the speed limit, but circumstances require people to do this all the time. But when is the flouting of the law just and when is it wrong? The law cannot tell us when to break the law with impunity. We have to use some other system to moderate and make human the law. The law courts do not just implement and apply the law, they imperfectly evaluate the law in terms of moral principles. It stands to reason that there is a line between good and evil. That we reject this truth is only because we reject morality. We reject morality because we want to scam the system God created. We want to avoid the truth and do evil. The essence of evil is the rejection of moral principles, which means the line between good and good is erased by moral relativism. Evil seeks to obliterate any distinction between good and evil, so evil always looks for the exception and the justification that permits evil to become good. In the October 7th War, the innocent slaughter of civilians is good because the Palestinians are oppressed, but the collateral killing of civilians is evil because Israel is attacking an enemy that uses human shields and will not build a single bomb shelter. One might claim racists are evil, but it is those who seek to do wrong on the basis of a perceived racism that are evil. The racist is not specifically evil because it is not necessarily wrong to be racists, as racism is a category created by evil. But that is the problem with evil man, he turns evil into that which he hates. Imagine a person on an island. He hates the people on another island, but there is no way for this man to reach the other island. Technically, he is a racist. He thinks this other group are evil because of their race. What crime has he committed? What evil has he done? What makes them evil other than his hate? There was hatred for Germans and Japanese in World War II. It was a patriotic duty to hate Germans and Japanese at this time, but not before or after the war. Why is racism a national duty one day and a national disgrace the day after? There is nothing inherently evil about racism, so it is only wrong in a particular context as defined by a particular group. Is the racial hatred of Palestinians for Jews wrong? If you cannot answer this and you think racism is evil, you are a dupe of Satan. There is nothing about a race that is inherently virtuous and deserving of love. The devil has us fighting proxy wars, or wars about incidentals, so we do not get involved in the real war against real evil. The fight against far-right extremism has the left making some very odd friends. There is a big difference between consorting with the enemy and targeting a person because of their race. But as the acts are the same in both cases, there has to be some other deeper issue to look at. But evil has nothing to do with skin tones. Racism is not evil because evil is not contingent upon race. Evil goes far beyond what is called racism and all of the other incidentals this world chooses to focus on. But to understand the nature of evil, we have to understand the nature of morality. Morality is often linked with the idea of doing no harm. It is easy to say, but harm is difficult to define. There are sins of omission and of commission. Not doing what is right is as wrong as doing things that are not right. But now we are back to where the line between good and evil is. We have come to understand this line cannot be defined by law. The law is under the command of man. Man's law make racism wrong one day and obligatory the next. Obviously, something deeper than law is guiding us when we say things such as just because it is legal does not make it right, and when courts are given the power to undo the work of the lawmakers. This brings us once more back to seeking the line between good and evil, because if the law is governed by something deeper than the law does not define good and evil. The thing that tells us some laws are not just as the governing principle that divides good from evil. This fact highlights the limitations of religion and the ethical way of doing things. Ultimately, religion must rest on a moral principle to legitimize the ethics used. But this means that morality cannot be defined by ethics, religions, or legal systems. Morality always exists as a higher court. This poses a problem for liberal man who values his or her freedom. Their freedom is always legitimized by an ethical system, nor a moral one. The analytical nature of morality is incompatible with the feminist principle of tolerance. But ultimately, all ethical rules serve one purpose alone: man does not wish to pay the cost of their sins. And here is the answer to the otherwise imponderable question of why a Christian would rather the Caliphate make progress when stopping it would require the institution of a theocracy. Theocracy forces us to pay for our sins. Repentance does not include absolution of costs. We do not need to pay our costs to God, but the harm we do on earth has to be rectified. But only if one is a Christian, and only if one is moral. The law provides an escape clause. Under the law one does not sin unless one breaks the law. Of all the religions, Sharia gives men the greatest legal cover.